Right now, literally beneath your feet, skimming the open ocean or maybe hiding inside the seams of a hotel mattress, there's this dynasty that has completely conquered the globe.
Yeah.
And they did it using like nothing but a bending beak.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. We're talking about 38,000 known species of true bugs, all of them operating under one, incredibly adaptable biological blueprint.
Right, 38,000. Welcome to this deep dive, by the way. For you, the curious learner listening right now, this is basically your ultimate shortcut to understanding a completely hidden empire.
Absolutely. It's an evolutionary masterclass in how to take a single set of tools and just modify them to infiltrate almost every conceivable microhabitat on Earth. Except for, well, the frozen expanse of Antarctica.
Thank goodness for Antarctica, I guess. But our guide for this journey is the monumental synthesis put together by Randall T. Shue and James A. Slater. It's called True Bugs of the World.
And, to understand why a comprehensive synthesis like this was so desperately needed in entomology, you really have to look at the state of the science before it arrived.
Which was a bit of a mess, right?
Oh, a total mess. Prior to this massive structural framework, the go-to text was N.C.E. Miller's work from 1956. And Miller was undeniably brilliant, but he had this overwhelming, almost exclusive obsession with one specific family.
The assassin bugs, right? The Rejuvidae.
Exactly. So if you wanted to know about assassin bugs, Miller was absolutely your guy.
But if you wanted to study the other, 30-some-odd thousand species, you were just out of luck.
Pretty much. His coverage of the rest of the suborder was painfully brief and honestly riddled with factual errors. The literature was just scattered across centuries, different languages, isolated journals.
Sounds like a nightmare to research.
It was. So Shue and Slater set out to pull all of that chaotic data down to the subfamily level into a reliable, structurally sound architecture that modern biologists could actually use.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get to the bugs themselves, before we look at the biomechanics of how they breathe underwater or how they drink blood, we have to look at the people who built that architecture.
Right, because organizing 38,000 species without modern genetics is a staggering epistemological problem.
It's the ultimate matching game, but the stakes are the entire tree of life. If you think about organizing a massive family reunion of tens of thousands of people, and you have zero DNA testing available.
You can't just swab a cheek.
Exactly. You have to put everyone into specific, accurate family lineages based entirely on how their faces look, who has a similar jawline, who has a slightly longer femur. That's morphological taxonomy in a nutshell.
And that specific challenge really defines the four distinct eras of discovery in Heteropteran study. It begins with the classical period, which stretches from Linnaeus up to about 1870.
Linnaeus being the guy who first drew a hard line around this group, right? Based on their mouth parts.
Right, what he termed the rostrum inflexum.
The bending beak. Because unlike beetles or ants that have mandibles for chewing, true bugs have this specialized straw-like rostrum that tucks under their body when they aren't using it.
Yeah, it's a piercing sucking mechanism. And after Linnaeus established that baseline, a student of his named Fabricius wrote the first exclusive monograph on the group in 1803.
But there's a huge catch with these early works, which is just wild to think about from a modern perspective. Take Carl Stoll, a Swedish entomologist in the 1870s.
Oh, Stoll's a perfect example.
He produced these massive foundational catalogs covering major families, but he did all of it without publishing a single illustration, not one.
Which is, you're trying to definitively identify a microscopic insect and you have zero visual reference.
You just have his incredibly dense, hyper-precise Latin text describing the exact curvature of a leg. You're basically trying to build a complex biological Lego set using only a text file.
And you have to hope your interpretation of, slightly convex exactly matches Stoll's interpretation from a century prior. It was incredibly difficult.
So what happened after that?
Well, the center of study shifted. We entered the period of European specialists, followed by an intermediate period where taxonomic dominance began shifting toward the U.S. and Japan after World War I.
Gotcha.
And finally, we reached the contemporary period, post-1950, which is defined by these rigorous, world-spanning revisional studies.
But the people doing this work in the trenches, these major workers, they were obsessive. Like Geza Horvath and Alexandra Kirichenko.
Yes, those two are legendary.
They described hundreds of complex species, making incredibly nuanced morphological distinctions, and they reputedly did all of it using nothing but a hand lens. A hand lens.
It is a testament to an almost superhuman level of observational rigor. Today, we rely on scanning electron microscopes to differentiate the tiny hairs, the setae, on a bug's leg.
And they were just out there with a piece of curved glass held up to the light. The sheer eye strain is hard to fathom.
Absolutely. And then you have the paradigm shifters, like the American entomologist Harry Hazelton Knight.
Ooh.
He solved one of the biggest problems in morphological taxonomy.
Because if you're just looking at color or size, those things change, right, based on the environment. A bug in a cold climate might just be darker than one from a warm climate, even if they're the exact same species.
Right. Environmental plasticity creates massive static in the data. Knight's breakthrough was realizing that while the outer shell might vary, the reproductive mechanics do not.
So what did he look at?
He was the first worker to consistently utilize male genitalia to differentiate species.
Because insect genitalia operate like a highly complex lock-and-key mechanism to prevent cross-species mating.
Precisely. If a mutation alters the shape of the parameres, that insect can no longer physically mate with the broader population. It's a hard evolutionary boundary. By mapping those specific internal structures, Knight found a much more stable indicator of true species divergence.
It's an ingenious solution. Just pivot from the superficial to the deeply functional. Which brings us to my favorite character in this history, Dennis Leston.
Ah, yes.
Yes. The book describes him as an iconoclastic commoner of flashing intellect. He completely ignored the outer shell and went straight for the deep internal machinery.
He was counting the exact number of tests follicles. He was analyzing the microscopic stridulatory organs, the specific ridges they rub together to produce sound.
He just represents this modern shift in entomology. We stopped looking at these insects merely as static shapes and started looking at them as highly complex biological machines.
And to truly understand the Heteroptera, we have to look at the physical architecture of that machine. Form and function are inextricably linked here.
Nowhere is that mechanical brilliance more obvious than in their legs. You look at the leg structure and it completely dictates the life history of that bug, starting with the basic cursorial leg.
Right, the slender, elongated legs built for walking and running across terrestrial surfaces. That is the ancestral template.
But the sheer plasticity of that template is what makes them so successful.
Exactly. Evolutionary pressure takes that basic walking leg and modifies the structural engineering to solve specific problems, like digging.
The fossorial legs. If you look at the Cydnidae, the burrowing bugs, they spend their entire lives underground, pushing through compacted soil. So their front legs are armed with these thick, brutal spines.
They act like serrated shovels.
But the craziest modification happens in the hind legs of some species, like Scaptocoris. They completely lose their tarsi.
The tarsi being the delicate, multi-segmented structures at the very end of the leg, essentially the foot.
Right, and intuitively, losing your feet sounds like a terrible strategy.
But not if you live in dirt.
Exactly. If your entire existence involves bracing against a tunnel wall to push your head through dense dirt, those delicate little foot segments are a huge liability. They just snap right off.
By eliminating the tarsi, the tibia, that heavy middle segment becomes a blunt, powerful piston. It maximizes pushing power.
It's like taking the rubber tires off a tractor so you can just grind forward on the heavy steel rims. Brutal, but perfect for the environment.
And if we pivot to the exact opposite environment, the water, we see completely different physics at play. In the semi-aquatic bugs, the Geomorpha, we see the evolution of rowing legs.
Right, where the middle and hind legs are drastically elongated to act as oars.
Yes, but more importantly, the claws on these legs are not located at the very tip, as they are in almost all other insects. They are inserted preapically.
Meaning slightly before the tip, which makes perfect sense. If you're trying to row across the surface tension of a pond, a sharp claw at the end of your oar is just going to pop the surface tension and you'll sink.
Exactly. By moving the claw up the leg, the bug presents a smooth, rounded surface to the water, spreading the force without breaking the tension. It's a microscopic adjustment that opens up a whole new biome.
But appendages aren't the only biological tools that evolution rigorously audits, right? We have to talk about wing polymorphism, specifically brachyptery.
The reduction or complete loss of wings is fascinating.
I always just assumed that if a bug lived in water, it lost its wings because wings are terrible for swimming, they create drag, they get waterlogged.
It's a very logical assumption.
Yeah.
But the data, particularly in the fully aquatic water bugs, the Nepomorpha, reveals a much more nuanced driver. Flightlessness evolves as a direct mathematical response to the permanence of the habitat.
Wait, permanence, so it's about how stable the pond is.
Precisely. If a bug lives in a temporary environment, like a vernal pool that forms in spring but dries up in August, that bug absolutely must retain its wings. If it can't fly away when the water vanishes, its genetic line ends.
So flight is an absolute prerequisite there.
But consider a bug living in a massive, stable lake or a permanent river system. The selective pressure flips entirely.
Because they never actually need to leave. The water is always there.
And this is where evolution acts as a ruthless biological accountant, building flight muscles, fueling them with metabolic energy, growing the wings. It's an enormous metabolic cost. If the habitat is stable, that expenditure yields zero return on investment.
So evolution just favors the bugs that drop the wings entirely. They take all that conserved energy and redirect it into reproduction, right?
Exactly. They produce more eggs or grow faster. The moment a biological tool is no longer strictly necessary, evolution aggressively eliminates it to balance the energy budget.
That is so ruthlessly efficient. Okay, so we've looked at how they modify their legs to dig and row and how they delete their wings. Now let's actually climb this evolutionary tree, starting at the very bottom.
The evolutionary basement.
Right, the most basal, ancient branches, the Onychocephalomorpha, or as I like to call them, the alien heads.
They are informally referred to as the unique-headed bugs.
If you look at the drawings of these insects, they do not look terrestrial. Their head is pinched in the middle, physically dividing it into two distinct bulbous lobes.
And their wings are entirely membranous. They lack the leathery half-wing structure that defines almost all other true bugs. They even lack a costal fracture, which is a specific structural break found in higher lineages.
Which means they split off incredibly early, right?
Oh, profoundly early. And we know this through the fossil record. Researchers have found Onychocephalomorphan fossils trapped in Lower Cretaceous amber from Lebanon and in Oligocene-Miocene amber from the Dominican Republic.
Fossils that are tens of millions of years old. And
Yeah.
the striking thing is, those ancient specimens are virtually identical to the species swarming today.
It's a remarkable example of morphological stasis. They hit upon a successful formula deep in prehistoric time, and the environment never forced them to change it.
And within this ancient infraorder, there's a fascinating reproductive divergence. You have the rare relic species with normal genitalia, but then you have the dominant family, the Onychocephalidae.
Right. They make up roughly 95% of the species in this group. You frequently find them forming massive mating swarms. Yet their male genitalia are incredibly reduced.
They lack the complex parameres of other bugs. The structure just acts as a simplified, racket-shaped guide.
It proves that even in these basal lineages, evolution is constantly experimenting, paring down structures to see what still works.
Okay, right alongside the alien heads, we have the Dipsacoromorpha, the microbugs.
And that's not an exaggeration. We're
Right.
talking about insects ranging from a maximum of 4 millimeters down to a mere half a millimeter in length. You could fit an entire population on a coin.
Yet they have some of the most perplexing morphology in the whole suborder,
Really?
especially their extreme asymmetry.
Yes, which goes against almost everything we expect from animal body plans. Most organisms are bilaterally symmetrical. But in male Dipsacoromorphans, the abdomen and genital capsule twist and warp across several segments.
It's totally warped. Why?
It's an evolutionary puzzle. The leading hypothesis relates to the physical geometry of mating in such a minuscule body size, but the exact advantage remains a subject of intense study.
It's like Picasso designed a bug. But beyond their weird shape, the ecological niches they exploit are terrifying. Take the genus Cryptostemma. They live in wet gravel banks right on the edges of fast-moving streams.
Which is a very dangerous place for a 2-millimeter insect.
Right. Because a heavy rainstorm means an instant flash flood. The sheer force of the water should crush them.
But they don't drown.
No. When the flood hits, they creep deeper into the gravel. And to survive underwater, they use one of the most brilliant tricks in nature, the plastron.
Ah, yes. The plastron is effectively a mechanical gill.
Right. It's not a lung and it's not a snorkel. The bug's body is covered in a ridiculous matrix of microscopic hydrophobic hairs.
So dense that when water rushes over them, the surface tension is physically incapable of penetrating the gaps between the hairs.
Leaving a microscopic silvery film of air permanently trapped against the bug's body. And here's the crazy part. As the bug breathes the oxygen in that bubble, it creates a gradient.
Exactly. The partial pressure of oxygen drops, which actively pulls dissolved oxygen directly out of the surrounding floodwater and into the bubble.
While the carbon dioxide diffuses out, it's an inverse submarine suit that generates its own oxygen supply indefinitely. They just sit in the dark gravel, breathing through a silver skin of air while a flood rages above.
It's elegant survival engineering.
Which is a perfect segue, because from those flooded gravel banks, we move up to the bugs that conquer the water's surface itself, the semi-aquatic bugs, the Geromorpha.
The undisputed masters of surface tension. This includes the familiar water striders, the Gerridae, and the smaller riffle bugs, the Velidae.
And the size range is huge. You have tiny species like Rumidobates at 1.6 millimeters, and then
Yeah.
absolute giants like Gigantomitra stretching out to 36 millimeters.
But whether you're 2 millimeters or 40, standing on water requires radical anatomical restructuring. You can't just drop a terrestrial bug onto a pond.
It'll just sink.
Right. Gravity and mass will overcome the hydrogen bonds. So the Geromorpha evolved a massively elongated mesothorax, the middle segment of their body.
Just stretching the body out to distribute the weight.
Yes. And their cocci, the basal joints connecting the legs, kind of like our hips, are oriented horizontally rather than vertically.
So they're holding a permanent, wide-stanced split over the water.
Combined with those preapical claws and hydrophobic hair pads, they press down on the surface tension without piercing it, creating shallow dimples that support their mass.
But they aren't just passively floating. Here's where it gets really interesting. They have turned the water into a massive sensory web. They actually talk through it using ripple communication.
It's a highly sophisticated vibratory network. By tapping their legs at specific frequencies, they generate microscopic waves.
And they have different songs. A male will tap a specific frequency to court a female. If another male shows up, he switches to an aggressive territorial frequency to say, hey, back off.
And they're constantly monitoring for the chaotic, high-amplitude thrashing of a drowning insect. They have specialized sensory setae on their legs, tuned exactly to read those microscopic changes in surface tension.
They are literally listening to the water with their feet to find food. It's incredible. And they don't just do this on ponds. They've pushed this to the most hostile environment on Earth, the open ocean.
Yes, the marine environment is famously devoid of insect life. But the Geromorpha are the rare exception. The text mentions Hermatobatidae, the coral treaders. But the pinnacle is the genus Halobates.
The sea skaters. They live their entire life cycle on the open pelagic ocean. They never touch land.
They endure pounding waves, UV radiation, high winds. They even lay their eggs on floating debris, like seabird feathers or bits of pumice.
It's like trying to live on a trampoline that's actively trying to kill you. But if the Geromorpha figured out how to walk on water, the next frontier is surviving beneath it. The deep divers. The Nepomorpha.
The true aquatic bugs. Their defining characteristic is mastery of the fully submerged environment. And the first morphological change you notice is what's hidden. Their antennae are highly reduced and tucked completely away into grooves beneath their eyes.
Because long antennas underwater are terrible for fluid dynamics. They create massive drag when you're trying to swim fast.
Oh, it's a strict evolutionary trade-off.
Yeah.
Sensory reach, sacrifice for hydrodynamic speed.
And they need speed because almost all of these aquatic bugs are predators. Some are absolute monsters, like the Belostomatidae, the giant water bugs. The book mentions Lithoceros maximus in the Neotropics.
Oh, their sheer scale is staggering. Up to 110 millimeters long?
Nearly 4.5 inches of heavily armored predator. They're so big they hunt vertebrates, snails, small fish, frogs, using these raptorial front legs.
Heavily muscled and structurally modified for grasping and pinning prey, much like a praying mantis, but underwater. And the text notes their bite is a matter of both folklore and reality.
Toe biters. And the pain isn't just a mechanical pinch, right? It's biochemical.
Deeply biochemical. They have that piercing, sucking rostrum. They inject a concentrated cocktail of proteolytic enzyme saliva designed to rapidly liquefy internal muscle tissue.
So they can drink their prey like soup. And if they bite your toe, those enzymes start digesting your tissue. No wonder it hurts. Note to self. Always wear water shoes.
Definitely. But not all Nepomorpha are these fast, free-swimming torpedoes. You have different strategies like the Nepidae, the water scorpions.
Right. They pivot from pursuit to ambush. They're actually poor swimmers. They just cling to submerged vegetation and wait for prey. But they still have to breathe, and swimming up ruins the ambush.
So they evolved a built-in snorkel, a non-retractable respiratory siphon on their tail end.
They just stick this tube up through the surface tension and breathe normally while hiding in the murky water. But the wildest thing about the Nepidae is their eggs. The text says the eggs have anywhere from 2 to 26 tiny respiratory horns.
Which sounds excessive until you look at the microhabitat chemistry. Nepidae frequently lay their eggs directly into decaying underwater plants.
And rotting plants use up all the oxygen in the water.
Exactly. The immediate area becomes highly hypoxic. The embryo would suffocate. So evolution provided the eggs with a localized respiratory array. Those horns greatly increase the surface area to pull trace amounts of dissolved oxygen.
It's evolution realizing the nursery is suffocating, so it glues 24 miniature snorkels onto the eggshell. Just brilliant. And before we leave the Nepomorpha, we have to talk about the masters of disguise, the Gelastocoridae.
The toad bugs, a fascinating group. They're classified as aquatic, yet they're almost exclusively found on muddy, sandy shorelines.
They're called toad bugs because they're basically miniature amphibians. They have a warty, heavily textured body, bulging eyes, and they move in short, aggressive hops.
And their camouflage is unparalleled. They mimic not just the color, but the physical texture of their specific microhabitat.
If they live on dark mud, they look like a clod of dark mud. If they move to speckled sand, they perfectly match the individual grains of sand. They're invisible until they hop.
It's a phenomenal convergence of morphological shape and cryptic coloration.
Now, since toad bugs moved out of the water, I have a question. Are we absolutely sure all Nepomorpha are strictly aquatic carnivores? Because nature rarely deals in absolutes.
That's a very sharp observation. While the vast majority are strict predators, evolution always finds the cracks. For example, look at the Coryxidae, the water boatmen. They are fully aquatic, but many species have evolved away from predation. They modified their front legs into broad, scoop-like structures to gather algae and diatoms from the bottom of the pond.
So they became underwater vacuum cleaners, using the same basic body plan. Okay, so we've conquered the water. Now we return to dry land to explore the most massive specialized groups, the Symmachomorpha and the Pentatomorpha.
We should briefly acknowledge the Leptopodomorpha as a transitional step. The shore bugs, like the family Saldidae.
Right, found in salt marshes and wet habitats, characterized by their enormous kidney bean-shaped eyes.
Exactly. It grants them excellent vision for hunting in bright, open zones. They're a vital morphological link to deep terrestrial habitats.
Which leads us to the Symmachomorpha, the blood drinkers and plant bugs. Let's go straight for the most infamous member, the bedbug, the family Simicidae.
A parasitic lineage intimately tied to human history. They are obligate hematophages.
Meaning they have absolutely no other food source besides blood, and their morphology is highly reduced because their environment, a human bed, is so stable, they lost their hind wings, they're flattened.
But the truly shocking biology of the bedbug is how they reproduce. The text details a process called traumatic insemination in Cymex lectularius.
It reads like a horror story.
It is arguably one of the most violent reproductive strategies documented. The male completely bypasses the female's reproductive tract. He possesses a highly modified left paromere that is hardened into a sharp, rigid spike.
He literally grew a biological hypodermic needle.
Precisely. During mating, he uses it to violently puncture the female's external abdominal wall, injecting his sperm directly into her internal body cavity.
Why would evolution select for a method that actively inflicts a massive, life-threatening wound on the female? It seems so counterproductive.
It's all about intense competition between males. By bypassing the traditional track, the male guarantees his sperm enters instantly, outcompeting other males to reach the ovaries first.
It's a selfish genetic arms race.
But the females have evolved a countermeasure called the spermolage. It's a distinct mass of immune-rich tissue located specifically where the male punctures the abdomen.
She evolved an internal catcher's mitt just to absorb the trauma?
Exactly. It stems the bleeding, manages the sperm, and prevents massive infection. It's a highly specialized morphological defense.
The sheer mechanical engineering is staggering. Okay, to cleanse the palate after the violence of bedbugs, let's look at the final massive infraorder, the Pentatomorpha, the shield bugs and seed eaters.
While Symmachomorpha are largely predatory or parasitic, the Pentatomorpha are predominantly phytophagous. They feed on plants. And because the plant kingdom is so diverse, they have radiated explosively.
Let's look at the Acanthosomatidae, the shield bugs. They have this large mesosternal keel, like the deep, V-shaped hull of a battleship on their underside. And the females have these unique things called Pendergast's organs.
Yes, paired structures on the female's abdomen. Their exact biological function, whether sensory or secretory, is still being studied, but they are a critical taxonomic marker.
Right.
It shows how granular Shu and Slater's text is.
But the wildest adaptability is in the dietary radiation of the family Lygaidae. The vast majority wait for a seed to mature, pierce the hard seed coat, and suck out the nutrients.
Standard phytophagous behavior.
Right. But then you have the subfamily Blissinae. They abandon seeds and just tap into the vascular tissue of grasses to suck sap.
A shift to a continuous liquid food source.
But then you have the Geocorinae, the big-eyed bugs. They belong to a plant-eating family, but they actively hunt other insects.
Yeah.
And then the craziest leap, the tribe Claridini, they feed on the blood of vertebrate hosts.
Nest-dwelling hematophages, feeding on mammals and birds.
How does that lead even happen? From cracking a sunflower seed to drinking mammal blood, the sensory changes seem insurmountable.
It's a phenomenal example of exaptation.
Yeah.
Mechanically, the rostrum used to pierce a dense seed coat is already strong and sharp enough to penetrate skin.
So the hardware already exists.
The true leap is sensory and biochemical. They had to evolve receptors to detect heat or carbon dioxide in the dark. And their saliva had to evolve from injecting digestive enzymes to injecting potent anticoagulants.
So the hardware stays the same, but they rewrite the software.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. We also see wing loss here, right, in stable environments.
Yes, many ground-dwelling Ligadeae have lost their wings, redirecting energy into finding seeds in the leaf litter.
Again, if you don't need it, evolution deletes it. Finally, we have to talk about the Pyrrhocoridae, the cotton stainers. They ruin cotton crops. They have bright red and black aposematic coloration.
Warning birds that they are toxic,
Oh.
and they completely lack simple eyes, or ocelli. But their true significance is in the laboratory. Species like Dysdurcus koenigii are model organisms.
They're the white mice of the true bug world.
Exactly. They are robust, large enough to dissect, and thrive in labs. Scientists use them to map complex endocrinology, like how hormones regulate molting. They're used to study the genetics of wing polymorphism.
It's deeply ironic that a major agricultural pest massively advanced fundamental biological science. It just encapsulates how complex our relationship with them is. So let's synthesize this. We started with centuries of taxonomy without pictures.
The sheer eye strain of the major workers.
Right, and we explored bugs that delete their feet to dig, use mechanical gills in flash floods, read ocean ripples, and leap from eating seeds to drinking blood.
What Shu and Slater have truly documented here is a masterclass in adaptability. From a single basal ancestor with a bending beak, the Heteroptera radiated outward.
They infiltrated the deep soil, the open ocean, the rotting ponds, and human beds. They are the ultimate opportunists.
Exploiting the physics of every environment they encounter.
And for you, listening to this deep dive, this changes how you see the world. Next time you see a water strider skimming a pond, you aren't just looking at a generic bug. You are looking at millions of years of fiercely audited morphological engineering.
Horizontal hip joints, microscopic ripple sensors, and energy-conserving body plans operating in real time. True knowledge allows you to see the complex machinery beneath the ordinary.
Exactly. You're seeing a planet conquered by biological machines. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. We talked about how flightlessness evolves in completely stable, permanent environments.
If it's too reliable, the biological accountant strips away their wings to save energy. Stability demands an invisible biological cost.
Right. It forces specialization. So think about humanity as a geological force. We increasingly engineer artificial permanence damming rivers to create stable reservoirs, planting thousands of acres of unending monocultures.
We are altering the deepest evolutionary pressures.
Exactly. By forcing artificial stability, what vital escape mechanisms, like wings, are we forcing species to genetically delete forever? And when that artificial environment eventually breaks down, when the dam fails or the crop dies, they won't have the tools left to fly away. Just something to mull over the next time you see an insect walking rather than flying across your path.